Audio contains explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Previously, on Hope in the Ashes.
My father held an evil smirk about him. He had the control he sought to have. My mom was beside herself, trying to figure out how to navigate past this newly birthed serpent. Through the lies, conspiracies, deception, gaslighting. What the fuck are we going to do? However, by their last meeting, there was a paradigm shift. By then, lives would look like. As I had said in the previous chapter, I couldn't sit back and let him do whatever he desired and merely watch us fall into the grave he was desperately trying to dig for us. There could be no silence. I had to make the absurdity of what he was doing known, while selfishly I lightly believed my repetitive outcries of his wrongdoing the same proof my mom didn't even want in the first place. All you want to do is manipulate everyone and everything to adhere to your standards. Everyone and everything has to benefit your life. Nothing you ever do is out of the kindness of your heart, because you have none. Even more sad, you'll retort that claim with, I have done things for you. Lying, cheating, manipulation, and abuse. You told your bullshit story, now we'll tell our story. The truth. But you're my top priority. But you're my firstborn son. But I will always love you. Shut up, you fucking cunt. Go fuck yourself. P.S. From what I hear,
This is Hope in the Ashes with Sean Fay. Part 2. Where We Are Today. Chapter 5. The Road Ahead.
It's a dismal day outside. Rain, wind, raw chill, which shouldn't be happening in March. It's just a colorless day. I woke up after 2:30 p.m., which almost seems too good on paper. I'd been feeling off. I was riding high for a while, then I found myself at the bottom of the hill on a roller coaster ride. Now I'm kind of coming up, but I really have no clue. I get up, take a piss, and head downstairs to make myself a nice wake-up iced coffee. Oh, good afternoon, butthole. Now it's almost evening at this point, she blurts out. It seems like it gets later and later. I almost came to a response, but ultimately held back. I literally got up earlier just a couple days prior. But I can't help but mull over the idea of whether she gets some kind of rush from digging into the fact I'm not where she is, or if she genuinely thinks this is all valid silliness. After I make my iced coffee, I grab a couple brownies from the stove and head back up to my room. Each day, when I wake up, I repeat a tradition I always have for pretty much all my life. Whether it be my autism at play, my lack of friendships, or even both, I always found myself thinking out loud, as I call it. Whether it be moments of elation or despair, I always find myself working through the motions that way under the cloak of privacy. I clearly know it's a little fucking weird to be doing such a thing in front of the general public, so I've known where my personal limits should always be. Then again, what really is weird nowadays? Most people are simply unique. Although I argue there's unique and then there's just flat out weird. Sharing your thought out loud with other people? Unique. Having a full-blown conversation where you greet and say goodbye to yourself? That's just fucking weird. But I get there's some that do it as part of their diagnoses too, amongst the weirdo hobos too, so I give grievance where I know I should. A little after 6 p.m., I decide to take a shower. Finally. I take my clothes off to reveal my large, round belly fat. I haven't known my weight since I last went to my doctor in December. Then I was just over 300 pounds, I think. I turn the shower on and feel the water to discover yet again it's warm at best. It's a problem that's been noticed since we moved in 3 months ago. We asked about it and we were told it would be looked into, yet we still see no results from it. Half of me sees the selfishness in expecting the water to be perfectly hot, yet the other half of me knows we shouldn't be needing to settle for something less than we deserve. Really, what everyone deserves. Eventually, I get out of the shower, brush my teeth, put deodorant on, get dressed, and make my way downstairs. As I stand in the kitchen, my stomach begins to churn. What the fuck now? You getting ready to make supper? Mom asks me. Yeah, but now I have to go upstairs and take a shit, I reply as I begin to walk back upstairs. While my stool was more solid in form before, this time becomes a mixture of liquidity and gas. Then it almost becomes like I'm dry heaving out of my rectum. You try and get all of it out of you, but you just can't. After sitting for a couple of minutes, I decided to give up. I wipe myself, stand up, wipe off the toilet from the unknown residue my asshole seems to leave now, and flush the toilet. I come back downstairs to begin helping with supper. I noticed the heat was on and was set to 67 degrees. It had been off for the past couple of weeks as it had been warmer out. I told your brother not to turn the heat on, but he turned it on anyway, she tells me. I roll my eyes and begin to mutter to myself. Well, that makes sense. I don't want it on, but let's just leave it on. Figures, out of all the other times she doesn't hear me, she finally decides to have impeccable hearing. Oh, shut up. We don't pay for it anyways, she barks at me. This is the fucking shit that doesn't make any sense to me. At all. She doesn't want the heat on. My brother turns it on. She doesn't turn it off, yet I'm the one who's bitched at. Common sense tells you if you don't want the heat on, then shut it off. But instead, I'm scolded for pointing out the painfully obvious. Just because we can leave it on doesn't mean we should. Like, is this what our world has come to? We can't even turn the heat off if we don't want it on. We have to leave it on, then bitch at whoever questions why the obvious hasn't happened. I ended up turning it off myself, but it's yet another example of why I sometimes feel my sanity is torn away, little by little, each day I'm stuck with my mom and brother. I'm fucking 26 years old, I shouldn't be having to deal with this bullshit. I'm past this, but yet some fuckhole had to focus on himself more than his own wife and kids, while also pinning all of us down in the process. So here I am, holding on to what threads I can to get to the next day. Eventually, my mom returned from the dismal weather outside with our mail, but later there was one more innuendo to add. Are you paying attention to the buns? She asked me in a half-derisive tone. Yeah, I have, I said. Well, I'm just asking. Well, someone has to get the mail, I retort. I began to grow annoyed at my mom's demeanor. You're right, someone has to. Just like someone has to do the laundry. Just like someone has to do the dishes. Here we fucking go. Yet again, it's me. Then she had to throw the final jab, which didn't really faze me this time. I keep telling you and your brother, if you don't like it, you could pack your shit and go. While I understood it to be mildly playful at the moment, it still doesn't excuse the level of arrogance that keeps arising from time to time. Ever since their final day in court, she developed this imperious disposition about herself. It's like that day she reached the top of the mountain. However, as she's haphazardly in awe of the astonishing sights, she callously forgets about me, still at the bottom. After all the screaming up to her to get her attention, she finally notices me below. Then all she can respond with is, I did it, why can't you? It's this pompous aura that shouldn't exist. She knows I'm not at the same point as she is. Everyone deals with travesties differently. Yet she constantly wanders back to reminding me how far above she is and how far below I am. Eventually, supper is complete. Oh, Daniel, she shouts down to my brother. At this rate, they begin to bicker back and forth about what he wanted on his burger. Nothing is ever a simple question-answer. It always has to be a short epic filled with tomfoolery from him and aggravating banter and response from her. Eventually, my brother appears from downstairs. His lack of hygiene blasts me in the face right away. Huh, he murmurs childishly. Is that my burgers? At 19 years old, he literally talks like he's 3. He has done this literally his whole entire life. I can remember Wawa melon instead of watermelon around age 4 or so. I'm sure there are other examples I can't think of right now, but most of his behavior has been nearly a decade behind. Yet when he's playing with his friends, he acts perfectly his age. He claims it's because it makes him feel comfortable, but who the fuck really knows the real reason? It's the same excuse he uses for taking a bath instead of a shower like every average 19-year-old does. Several per day, I'll add. To tie this back to the previous exchange, the sink has been basically empty for the past couple of days. I hadn't seen a need to take care of them. Then, the laundry. I emptied out her 2 bins of dirty clothes in the basement where our washer and dryer are, without any acknowledgement of what I did to try to rectify this issue. Even before that, she establishes 4 bins, 2 for me and 2 for her. Then, days after I'd been placing my dirty clothes in the bin she designated for me, I get blamed for something I wasn't doing. My bins will have to be emptied out, I said simply. Well, if someone would put their clothes in the bin they're supposed to, we wouldn't have this problem. There's an even more clear-cut example of the bullshit I deal with, which still irks me today. A couple weeks or so ago, my mom had been mentioning over the course of days she had been doing laundry, placing me on lookout for my clothes to be done. However, after quite a few days, I hadn't noticed any clothes being cleaned and brought up for me to fold and put away. Not all the way up to my room, just up to the main floor halfway. Usually the plan is she washes and dries my clothes and then she brings them up to me so I can fold them and put them away. We agreed to that right when we moved, so I was curious as to why my clothes weren't done yet. Nothing enraging, I was just purely curious. Are my clothes clean yet? I asked. Why don't you go down and look? She shouts back. Well, I was just asking since you were doing laundry the whole week, I reply. Again, nothing fiery, I was purely asking for an ETA. Yes, I have been, but nothing says you can't go down there yourself and look and see if they're done. I've been telling you to do this for how long now? Something she's been doing perfectly fine on her 2 days off now gets pinned on me. I later came to a consensus of something that occurred in that exchange. It was something my father was notorious for doing. When I went down to check the laundry, I noticed there was a clothes bin piled pretty high and folded with my clothes in it. I began to think about the fact these clothes had been sitting there for a while. So, instead of simply bringing my clothes upstairs as she had been doing, these clothes sat down there for the whole week, and she had chosen to wait until I said something, then bitch at me for even asking. To put it more simply, my thought was she had left the clothes downstairs so she could wait until I asked about it, then proceed to bitch at me for not going downstairs before when she had been downstairs to begin with, all instead of just bringing them up as she had been. Knowing the importance of a life skill as simple as doing laundry isn't something I lack. I could do it just fine. I also know it would be helpful for me to do the laundry. However, I came to this realization, in reality, I'm not choosing to be home. I'll easily be on my own the second I can. Therein, these chores she miraculously thrusts onto me wouldn't get done if I wasn't at home. Really, my brother should be stepping up to the plate, seeing his situation isn't as clear-cut as mine. I don't ever want to give in to it, but sometimes my mom and I believe he will never make it out on his own. Between his impulsivity, lack of proper hygiene, and overall unwillingness to help us out, his future looks very grim regardless of the vast amounts of time he holds. While he should become a priority for chores, he isn't. Instead, the one who clearly can demonstrate he can do chores is now expected to. How does this make any sense? Sometimes I seriously can't even point out anything without a sour notion from my mom. Granted, this only happens every so often, but still, I don't need this shit. Fucking 26 going on 16. How am I supposed to move forward if I'm shoved backwards? I'm supposed to be harnessing a matured sense of being in the aftermath of my corrupt father. Yet it sometimes feels the same as before his departure, just with a lighter twist. In these dim moments, I can't escape the suspicion of there being fragments of him still stuck in her. From all the years of blind complacency with the torment we endured, there could be still a tired sentiment deeply innate within her. Some of his aberrant behavior tends to still show itself in these sporadic moments. Thankfully, I am more than confident she will never fall into an egotistical trance like his permanently. But who knows? Lethargic, anxious, scared, cold, disheveled, torn apart, agonized, depressed, desperate, disconnected, yet hopeful. Today has to be yet another day I must battle through just to get to the moment where bedtime approaches, at nearly 3 a.m. or so. This after falling asleep for a relatively short period of time. Then you awaken to your heart rate rising. Why? I have no clue. Something urges you to panic. You take deep breaths, merely trying to keep your heartbeat low. I eventually conclude getting up and taking a piss might resolve this sudden conflict. It turns out it sort of does. You lay back in bed, oddly comfortable, more than usual. However, sleep still fights to stay away. Luckily, all things must conclude at some point. Yet what doesn't conclude is this low-grade aura, one you've noticed before. Finally, at 2:15 p.m., you awaken knowing you must get up soon. You can't stay in bed all day. Or could you? Eventually, at 3:15, you say, fuck it. At the end of this past year, I was holding on to so many things I never wished to let go. I had a car, my very first purchased car, in such a grave state of disrepair. Yeah, I bought it from Carvana. Never again. I had my therapist of over 12 years to talk to. Such a great friend he was. He was someone I never had any issue hashing out life's tribulations with. But sadly, it was becoming clear the past couple years were making my stay progressively overdue. The tension was high. Our connection began to decay as much as I never wanted to believe it. I was also a member of an online racing league with a couple of guys I thought had my best intentions in mind. I thought we were an unstoppable force, but before I let go of any of this, I let go of my father. I never imagined a day where I would witness all I have wither away in such a short amount of time. But it did. He left, then a year or so later I lost my racing friends, I gave up on my car, then finally I gave up my longtime friend James. You may be wondering why I made such a preposterous decision to trade freedom in for seclusion from the outside world. Well, my mom was leading me towards opening my eyes to what I had at the time. I had a car which was broken down for nearly the millionth time, a car I insisted on fixing when I never had the money to do so. I was losing my enjoyment of constantly grinding towards a couple $100 every week, money which would disappear so fast from desperation that becomes so potent from having no money all the time and no understanding of managing money properly. She kept gnawing at me to let the car go, constantly informing me of all the members of my family who sided with her. Just let it go. You're just wasting your money trying to keep the thing living longer. Meanwhile, advice from the likes of Dave Ramsey YouTube videos sided with me. You should never dig yourself such a hole you never get out of. It'll make it that much harder to move forward from the problem. My mom had led me to the realization at the time, why am I clinging on to things I somehow believe I can fix? I mean, I literally have no money whatsoever. Even under $1,000 was a struggle to get to, regardless of it being a struggle I created each time. All talk, no action. So, after the constant pressure I couldn't stand anymore, I took a leap like the one she did in November 2022. Fuck it. Just stop being stubborn, let it go, and move on. So, it led me to voluntarily surrender my first purchased car, my 2010 Dodge Avenger RT. I thought the car was cool at the time. I still remember so vividly the day I got the car. After having my 2005 Buick LeSabre rear-ended and totaled, which was gifted to me by my beloved grandfather, Pop-Pop we called him, I was in search of a new car in October 2020. Carvana provided a new way of purchasing a vehicle. With the COVID-19 pandemic raging at the time, I was in no mood to deal with sitting around at a car dealership trying to find a car with a mask covering my face. Fuck it, I might as well look online for a car. Fast forward to November 30th, 2020. It was dark, rainy, and very windy. You know, a classic nor'easter. It was the worst day possible to have a car delivered to me. It was almost like a foreshadowing. But here came the Carvana flatbed with my newly acquired vehicle. Not only did I have nearly no knowledge of how to inspect a new vehicle I was looking to take in, but I was also so desperate to have a new vehicle, I honestly couldn't give the slightest shit if the front fender was slightly bent. Ignorance was the driving force of my decisions back then. I say back then when that was literally over 3 years ago. But much has changed in that amount of time. After choosing to accept the vehicle, so many problems manifested. It had a flat tire the next day due to a bent valve stem. It failed its very first state inspection due to a handful of other issues, including ball joints that were loose. I went through over 3.5 years bouncing from problem to problem to problem. At the end, initially, the gear shifter assembly broke, causing the car to almost roll backwards into the street while stuck in park. On top of that, the battery died after getting a new one 8 months prior. Therefore, I had reached a point where the going got too tough. I couldn't be so adamant about fixing up the car and getting it running again when I clearly wasn't aiming to save the proper money to do so. Yes, I was bitter the whole time because the car was in disrepair from the day I got it, but that didn't mean shit to anybody, not even Carvana. So, like I said before, I said fuck it. I figured at this point I would try another way, one which wasn't filled with so much naivety. I might as well own up to the situation in hopes of seeing a resolution my ego never saw before. Now I sit with over $5,000 owed, which I have to pay back, and absolutely no sight of getting out of this hole I chose to dig. Racing has always been a modest passion of mine, especially within simulation games. One of these games being NASCAR Racing 2003 season, and our 2003. At the end of 2017, after dicking around with the game offline, I found the online community and decided to start my own racing league. Rubbin' and Racing Motorsports, R&R, became my baby. For as much egotism existed within my tenure of running the league and its races, I still loved every minute I got to be a part of something more than myself. Sadly, ego was the nail in the coffin for R&R. My constant effort to build other human beings into something I viewed as being better than who they wanted to be themselves proved to be a great failure which only led the league further down the drain. Eventually, I met two individuals who carried me past the shadow of my failures. I will call them Kyle and Jerry for the sake of this book. Kyle came into my life at such a time where I found myself itching for a new beginning. I remember thinking he would see me as some new punk kid on the scene. It turned out Kyle was someone just as I was, looking for the same outcome for his own league. From there, we set out on a mission to become the cream of the crop, the magnum opus of NR 2003. Eventually, Kyle and I came across another individual, Jerry, who had been hanging out in the community for the past couple of years prior. After an inside joke, he began creating computer models in order to develop modifications for the game. Mind you, the game is over 20 years old at this point, so the game has been long since abandoned by its developer Papyrus Design Group, which now exists as the popular racing simulator iRacing. As we were building our empire, for lack of a better term, my relationship with Kyle and Jerry eventually fell, just as Julius Caesar and the Romans did. As my flaws began to metastasize, Kyle and Jerry simply began to dislike the process I was taking myself through with regard to discovering myself. Or, if I could put it in a different way, they began to dislike who I am. By the latter half of 2023, I thought I would make one last effort to try to mend the wounds of the past. However, that was when I uncovered the unthinkable. I was being led towards my own downfall. Kyle and Jerry simply couldn't stand me anymore, and they knew I wouldn't walk away on my own. So I was constantly pressured into leaving Kyle's longtime racing league until I finally hit my breaking point, October 2023. No prior communication was had, just continued to piss me off until I explode and leave once and for all. It was all revealed to me by Kyle himself after an argument I had with him. Kyle and Jerry were completely dismissing another person in the league after he was responding to a penalty levied against him. Rather than being spoken to in a civilized way, he was given a response you would find an artificial intelligence bot like ChatGPT giving. I just couldn't take the lack of respect and couldn't remain silent, especially when the problem was focused on someone else in the league I greatly respected. Long story short, my personal vendetta with Kyle and Jerry briefly spilled out in front of all other members of the league, which led to my permanent banishment. There, in a heated private exchange, Kyle revealed his true intentions of the last couple years or so. Just wear me out until I had no more. There's way more to it than I even have the energy to go through. Needless to say, I realized how silly I was for believing Kyle and Jerry were true friends that respected every facet of who I was, what I was dealing with, and wanted to see me succeed. Really, they still had their own selfish, immature desires. Because my personality didn't meet their standards, that's when I had to go. Mine and their own immaturity caused the mess that transpired just 5 months prior to me composing this memoir. Hindsight tells me my experience was no different than a Call of Duty server from the late 2000s. Hell, it probably still happens today. Back then, you could be told so many obscene, unnecessary things. Your mom's gay. You should kill yourself, it. Go fuck yourself. Suck your friend's dick, etc. You would hear any variation of those graphic statements simply because you weren't as good as these players were. It's why I eventually stopped playing games like that online. I never had the time to try to be good at a game only to be schooled by someone way more experienced than I was, and then proceed to be told I like to, quote, fuck my dad in the asshole, end quote. Sorry, while very graphic, such evil cannot be hidden from the world. Regardless if you either watch YouTube videos or play online games on a regular basis, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. Unironically, Kyle told me a story several years ago about telling someone he should kill himself while the two of them were playing in a Halo server. He played Halo with this person all the time. After that day, he never saw the kid online again. He could deny it, but I distinctly remember that story. What I went through with Kyle and Jerry was a close resemblance of evil scenarios like what I just mentioned. Merely replace skill with personality. Rather than having a simple dialogue about what problems existed and what needed to be corrected, as I asked for several times before, they chose silence to kill. That it did, so that was yet another loss in my life. One last thing I had to give up was my long-term therapist, who I will call Jim. He knew me for nearly half of my lifetime. I met him in my second year of middle school. I was having, issues. My autism diagnosis caused my learning curve to be slower than most around me. What I was learning in my teenage years were mainly things my peers learned earlier in childhood. I inserted myself into situations most of my peers wouldn't even attempt to. Pride tells me they just didn't have the balls I did to try to gain what I wished to. However, humility knows I refused to listen to those who wanted the best for me. I knew what I wanted and I was going to get it. One of those people who wanted the best for me recommended Jim to my mom as a support line. Especially if this person was going to speak in psychological tongues to me, giving me copious medical reasons for what I'm doing. Fuck that shit. I just need people to hear me and give me a chance. Well, really, I just wanted my desired outcome to reveal themselves, which nearly all of them didn't. My first meeting with Jim was hard. Holding the same mindset I just exclaimed, I was firm in not revealing my inner self to Jim. He would ask me a question, I would shut down. However, after a few minutes, I began to see Jim in a very different light. After a decade of work with me, he helped me not only get through so many futile situations I got myself into, but he also helped shape me into a much better person than I would have been without him. Jim was way more of a human than I initially thought he would be. He's someone with character, someone who could get to me in a certain bold way that I eventually realized I needed. While the first half of our time together was more elementary, the rest of our time was where I learned a lot of concepts I continue to employ today. One other thing I learned from Jim is knowing when it's time to leave. When my family made our final move before calamity struck, it seemed Jim became more agitated with me. There were days we would talk candidly. Then it would follow with days where he would start poking at issues never discussed before. In his defense, I had reached a point where I unintentionally commanded our appointments. I would say hello, sit down, ramble for roughly 50 minutes, schedule my next appointment, and say goodbye. Months of this cycle on repeat, I'm sure, would tire any therapist out regardless of their experience. I had no one else in my life outside of home other than Jim. That's literally it. So, my brain essentially became a sponge filled with so many thoughts and occurrences that needed to be discharged every meeting. I couldn't handle keeping it all in, and my constant stronghold wouldn't allow Jim to have a moment to do his job. Did I feel horrible about that? Absolutely. However, I didn't know any better than to splurge my brain out onto Jim, as much as I could, as fast as I could, chasing a sense of relief for releasing everything out and seeing what Jim thought about it. It all came down to December 2023. I finally entered a place where I was recently discovering courage. Jim had placed an ultimatum on me. I had been running out of time on my parents' medical insurance. Since I would be looking to fall into state-issued healthcare, Jim informed me he doesn't handle state-issued healthcare. So basically I was left with two options. I could A, stick it out with Jim until my 26th birthday, or B, just end it now and say goodbye to him. Like I said, I found myself in a new thought process. In the past, I always avoided the dilemma in front of me and continued on with blinders down. This time, I was beginning to realize I needed to confront issues that were right in front of me instead of deflecting them away. My car was constantly in disrepair, yet I always looked away from it. Kyle and Jerry, who I insisted were two friends who had their own rough patches to deal with, pushed my existence away time after time, yet I always looked away from it. This was a time for me to finally look directly at my strife and make a decision that would make an impact on my future. Even though I always wanted to hang on to Jim until I got married, I finally realized I couldn't hang on to him any longer. So I chose to end it, 5 days before I originally would have. That day was tearful, and also fairly immediate. I only made the decision less than 24 hours before my last meeting with him. But among the grief, I knew it was the best decision I needed to make. Now he's a memory for me. While I managed to leave on great terms with an offer for non-professional coffee or lunch somewhere down the road, I have no clue if that will ever happen. He agreed to it, I just don't know if he would ever take me up on it. Conversely, he may be feeling the same about me. I'll have to see.